This is a sports catastrophe production. Hey there, hello there, it's Jeff Cutter and welcoming you to another sports catastrophe on this day. And on this day, November 6, 1995, a day Cleveland football fans will not forget, unfortunately. That's when the Cleveland Browns decided to move to Baltimore because the city wouldn't give them funding for a new football stadium. There's a whole lot to deal with when you talk about the Cleveland relocation thing. I mean, aren't Modell moving the Cleveland Browns to Baltimore? I mean, Cleveland is one of the most revered NFL franchises around. Yeah, they came from the All-American Football Conference in 1950, but they were dominant in the AAFC. Heck, they shocked a lot of NFLers, especially Commissioner Burt Bell, who was trying to fuck them over, that they were good, and they won the 1950 NFL title. But there was some kind of issues. It had to do with stadium things. So anyway, in 1975, knowing that municipal stadium was costing the city over $300,000 annually to operate for both the Browns and the Cleveland Indians, Modell signed a lease of 25 years to incur these expenses for quasi-ownership of the stadium, a portion of profits, and capital improvements to the stadium. So they did that. Modell promised never to move the Browns because he was publicly critical of Baltimore's move to Indianapolis and tried to get Al Davis to not move from Oakland to LA because of his hatred for Pete Rozelle. But Modell refused to share the suite revenue with the Indians. And a lot of the revenues were generated during baseball games because there were 81 baseball games at Cleveland Stadium and only 8 football games for the NFL. The Indians convinced local government and voters to build a new ballpark and give the suite revenue to the Baseball Corporation in 1990. And Modell, believing that his revenues were not endangered, decided not to participate in the Gateway Project that built Jacobs Field for the Indians and Ben Arena for the Cavs. Unfortunately, he screwed up, and his suite revenues declined sharply after the Indians moved to Jacobs Field. And of course, with player salaries and deficits, Modell lost a lot of money, like $21 million. Due to the consistent increase in NFL franchises, the NFL has a long history of owners whose net worth is largely accounted for by the value of their football teams. Modell's financial situation was meager by NFL standards. He had to borrow a lot of money to buy the Browns in 1961, and he was in financial difficulty. So anyway, Modell wanted a new stadium or to renovate Municipal Stadium for his own sake. I mean, there's nothing wrong with renovating Cleveland Municipal Stadium to make it football only. It makes sense. The Browns were ready to go in the 95 season. They looked good. They were in the playoff. They were the previous year at 11-5. And Sports Illustrated even said that the Browns looked good. And they might even go to the Super Bowl. So the Browns started off 3-1 and then faltered, losing their next 3 games. At 3-4, the Browns were not really that good. While this was happening, Browns minority owner Al Lerner prodded Modell to move to Baltimore. And because earlier in the year, the league said that Baltimore could get a team, either an expansion team or a relocated team, if a stadium was already in place. And of course, Baltimore had the Colts move from their city to Indy in 1984, so they needed something to happen. So they got the stadium they were looking for. Anyway, it was terrible. So, November 6, 1995, with the Browns 4-5, not really doing that well, Modell announced in a press conference that he would sign the deal to move the Browns to Baltimore for the 96 season. And he figured that the city of Cleveland didn't have the funding or political will to build a first-class stadium. However, the next day, Cleveland voters approved the tax issue to remodel Cleveland Stadium. But Modell could not rule out a reversal. Could not. reversed his decision, saying that the bridge with Cleveland's down, Bird disappeared. There's not even a canoe there for me. But the city of Cleveland was not too happy and all of that. So when Cleveland took on Pittsburgh, there was a fan jam about to protest this proposed move. ABC didn't cover or mention the protest, mostly because Drew's show was on ABC and all that. And that game was one of the few instances that Steelers fans and Browns fans were supportive of each other. The Browns were a mess. They were 5-11 at that year. The only team they beat in the AFC Central was the expansion Jaguars. And the worst part is, the Cleveland couldn't even beat Jacksonville. They became the first team in the NFL's modern era to lose twice to a first-year expansion team. Well, of course, things had changed that you could play an expansion team in your own division twice instead of once. Anyway, Cleveland had no advertising during the team's final weeks. The team couldn't win a home game after the announcement on November 6th, except for the game against the Bengals when they beat them. The good news about this move was that Cleveland could move to Baltimore, but they would have to leave everything behind. The NFL said that the Browns franchise would be deactivated for 3 years on the grounds that Cleveland Stadium must be replaced and all that. They needed a new stadium, and either an expansion team or a relocated team will move in '99. Modell would get the new franchise for Baltimore. Of course, that meant that the Browns' name, colors, history, records, awards, and archives will stay in Cleveland for the reactivated team. And only 2 people voted no for that move. So the stipulation is in realignment that Browns would be placed in the division with Pittsburgh and Cincy because of long-standing rivalries. The Browns were placed in the AFC Central with the Steelers and Bengals, as well as the Ravens, the Titans, and the Jaguars. So Baltimore, Cleveland, and Pittsburgh would be in the same division for the first time in NFL history. And then when there was a 32nd team in the NFL, that being Houston, Cleveland was moved to the AFC North with Pittsburgh, Cincy, and Baltimore. So, yeah, it was the black and blue division, as they call it. There was a legacy happening and all that for the Baltimore Ravens. So Cleveland, of course, got their team back and finally won a playoff game last year in the 2020 season. They only been to the playoffs once before as a franchise, 2003, when they choked in Pittsburgh. But they got their revenge on Pittsburgh. But as is, the NFL moved to Baltimore. And the worst part is that Al Lerner, who actually was helping Modell move to Baltimore, actually was granted ownership of the Cleveland Browns. So in a strange way, he got the team, and it was probably a trick up his sleeve so that he could get the Cleveland Browns. Who knows what his name? Well, of course, Al died in 2001, and his son's not saying anything. But of course, this actually had ramifications on both sides of the border. Cleveland moved to Baltimore. But here's why it affects Canada. And I think I said in the Art Modell thing. The Baltimore now had an NFL team to deal with. Of course, the CFL, Canadian Football League, decided to try to put some stuff in the American market, but failed miserably. So, seeing that, and with the fact that every CFL American team minus the Baltimore team were doing terribly at the box office, fans didn't want to see it, and Baltimore was off a Grey Cup victory over Calgary, the writing was on the wall. There was an NFL team, so they couldn't support NFL and CFL, so Jim Spears decides to sell the Baltimore CFL team, the Stallions, to Montreal, who were without a CFL team since 1987. And in a fairy tale ending in Canada, the Montreal Alouettes retained a lot of the Baltimore players like Tracy Ham, Anthony Cafiello, and Mike Pringle, among others. So they moved to Montreal. They played at Stade Olympique, Olympic Stadium, for a few years, and then moved to Molson Stadium, which is home to McGill, which ironically only happened because the Alouettes were supposed to play a home playoff game at Olympic Stadium, but because of a U2 concert, they decided to move it to McGill, which is smaller but more intimate. And then the Alouettes, after winning that game, decided, hey, why don't we just move to the outdoor stadium? And we don't have to deal with a decrepit stadium. And we don't have to share Olympic Stadium with the Expos. So that's what they did. They moved to McGill Stadium, and Olympic Stadium still had the Expos till 2004. And U2, I think, got a lot of fan letters saying thank you for that move. So yeah, and the Alouettes were one of the class acts of the CFL, winning a few Grey Cups since. And I'm a stone cold Alouettes fan. What can you do? Anyway, I'm Jeff Diamond. I do.